I am Yamato Cannon, and this is Muffin, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel.
Right, this is going to be another episode of Reflections, and my guest for this one is going to be Jack Etienne, who is the founder and CEO of Cloud9. I actually want to start with this interview, since we're going to start in League of Legends, way back before most people even know, which is actually before you were in League of Legends. So one thing I remember hearing about you actually early on, because I only knew you as like a guy from TSM, and then you started Cloud9, was I remember someone telling me that you worked in like ad sales for Crunchyroll, which people might know, at least it was very famous, like 10 years ago, as one of the main anime websites that people could watch it streaming online back in the day, right? Was that in any way tangential to what you've done in your career in esports? If people don't know, it's often said that in the modern day, team orgs, they're not really at the same status as like NFL franchises. They're more like an ad agency, essentially, for a group of players that go under a certain banner, and you sell the banner, as it were, and then the players within that, each of the likenesses, etc. Do you actually see what you did with Crunchyroll? Are there any ties to what you've done in esports since? Was it a good basis for that? Is it a different world? What would you say?
I think it was like instrumental in my ability to run a profitable organization right from the get-go, in that if you look at the people, like I ran the ad sales team for Crunchyroll, and the demographic, the people that watch anime, are like 90% male, ages like 16 to 25. Turns out to have like almost a complete copy paste like demographic switch from anime to people who watch like esports. And so when I got involved in esports, like there was negative money involved in esports. It was really just people who just did it because they loved it. That's how I got into it too. I was, TSM was an advertising client for me. I helped them make money with their website, and I was interested in competitive like sports in general, and I rated about a high end at on World of Warcraft, so I was just naturally interested in it. And when Reginald was telling me, "Hey, I'm going to go to this tournament," I'm like, "Wait, what's going on here? I want to watch it." And I thought, like, wow, this game is really interesting. The fan base is super motivated, and so I just started going with him and the team to events, following them, help him run his team, and again, it was just like a hobby, I would say, for Reginald, and his ad business supported TSM. And then when I had the opportunity to actually make my own team, I reached out to my customers at Crunchyroll. I said, "Hey, this exact same demographic is watching this game, and why don't you sponsor my team? It's going to be a really good team, and you're going to get a lot of good visibility, like for your brands across the exact demographic that you want from Crunchyroll. And I think it's going to be really good for you." And although they were a bit hesitant, I'd been working with them for a while, and we had a really good relationship, so they trusted me, and so they went all in. And by the time LCS kicked off that summer for me, for Cloud9, I had enough sponsors to be like at about break even, which for esports in general is unusual. It was really unusual. And so it definitely, like, the work I did at Crunchyroll and the expertise I had in sales was absolutely like one-to-one taken across to running Cloud9, and helped me start in a real favorable financial situation.
The other thing is, when you actually started the League of Legends part of Cloud9, I feel like these details are always lost. Like, I don't even think they're often as trivia on those wiki sites. So if people don't know, some of the players who eventually were in Cloud9 League of Legends were in a team called Cloud9, but that's just because you could put any name and just be a team in a competition. It wasn't like an org, but they actually didn't play for that team, because that team was the one they'd played with at the first qualifier. They were playing for Quantic, who at the time was like mainly known in StarCraft. And so you bought the players from the Quantic team once they qualified, beating Complexity, and then you did what? You bought the old name Cloud9 from someone, or the rights or something, or you just used it? What was the logic behind all that?
It was pretty confusing. Like, so a lot of people don't really know is like I actually bought the second place team, GGU. In the LCS, and I bought them for $23,000 from the owners. And once I talked with the team, like, "Hey, guess what? I bought the team. It's going to be great. I'm going to make sure that you run better than you have been." Those players, they didn't want to play with me. They had been talking with the Slans, and they had some really good plans on the team that they wanted to build. So it became really clear, like, these guys don't want or share my vision of what I wanted to build in esports, and they wanted to play with the slants, which is totally fine. So when I was trying to sort that out, and I was really nervous about like how do I get players that actually want to work with me, I was introduced to High, and he said, "Hey, like my contract is pretty easy to, I can step out of it. I have a good relationship with the Quantic guys. I want to step out." And we'll join you because I think you do a good job. I'm like, okay, sure. So and the reason I was happy about that because I had been watching this team, Quantic, scrim against TSM for weeks upon weeks, and they were just crushing everybody. I'm like, okay, this is an upgrade. What a great situation. I sold GGU to the slants for 23,000. Just got my money back, and I bought out the contracts from Quantic. And I had this plan on this on the team name that I wanted to go with, the brand. I had websites and everything ready to go. And I told all the guys about it. And High's like, I think I'd really rather play under Cloud9. It's a team name that we used to play for before, and I really like it. I'm like, that's a pretty good name. And I'm like, why don't we, this is not big business. This was just like, it was like 5 guys and an owner just trying to have fun. And I'm like, let's just put this to a vote. And Sneaky and Meteos and me all voted for the brand that I had. And High and Balls and Lemon all voted for Cloud9. And I was thinking, I'm the owner. I was tiebreak, right?
Yeah, of course.
But High goes, I'm the team captain, so my vote counts for 2. So we're Cloud9. And I just laughed it off. I thought it was hilarious. I'm like, okay, sure, whatever. But I was concerned at the time, like, Cloud9 is not really unique. How are we going to get like the the Twitter Cloud9? How are we going to get YouTube? How are we going to get websites? How do we trademark this thing? It was going to be difficult. And so like part of the reason like we contracted our name from Cloud Space 9 to just Cloud9 is because it had a better chance of being unique in California and making it a company and made it easier with trademarks. Yeah. And although it was annoying at the time, but it ended up helping us out. There was a cloud9.com. It was a website, and it was a web service company of some type.
Oh, okay.
Amazon. While I was looking to go pick it up, Amazon bought them, so I knew I was never going to get that. So I stuck with. I followed actually. Alex Garfield started putting a lot of esport teams under the .gg.
Yes.
And so I'm like, hey, that's a good idea. And so thank you, Alex, for that one. And I ended up just following suit with that.
Right, obviously one name that's already come up there is, to me, still the most iconic player of Cloud9. High, of course, the mid lane captain, at one point in time, the jungler, then the support, right? But you've just led into it perfectly there. If people don't know, I feel like until maybe like the streaming era, and even then, when he's on camera, he definitely is one of those guys who understood really early in esports, like how media is and how you're perceived and what you want your image to be. Because actually, as a player, you have a lot of choice in that if you're actually very careful. Like, people are there to make you look good and look like a star. One thing people might not know is he always came across as like, I can see why all the girls liked him. He seemed like such like just a cool guy and so level-headed. And in the game, if he was intense, but he wasn't like toxic or anything. But I know from talking to this guy and from seeing him on other teams as well, he's got a very strong personality. He can be cocky. Put it this way, when all those people told him for years that you're not that good at mid lane or like, just retire or whatever, he never thought that at all. He used to think he was the best. He thought like, who cares? As long as I get the trophy, who gives a fuck basically. So can you give me some insights as to who High was to you? Because obviously a very iconic player and quite essential to the building of the org, right?
Yeah, I think he does have really strong personality, and I think it's really necessary when you were trying to run a team. He like, let me think. He was a really good, like, I would say, partner and teammate. Because I would tell him like, hey, we want to get this sponsor, and so we want to, or we want to renew with this sponsor, and we need like this type of visibility, this type of care, this type of like elevation of their brand. And he was always really careful to try to help like Cloud9 as an organization look good and clean and someone that brands could feel comfortable like investing in. And that was like, it was pretty unique at that time. Not a lot of players had that like the thoughtfulness, and having someone like as a partner like that to help us get us going is super valuable. And I think back on that, like yeah, like him, and to be honest, all of those players were really easy to work with as far as like when I would tell them. And I think part of it was I was setting the expectations like, hey, if we want to get the sponsors, which are gonna, which directly results to our pay, these is what I would need out of you. And they would listen to it, think about it, and then really make an effort to try to make sure our brand looked good. I think Hai as a person, although he seems sometimes just like really chill and relaxed, like on camera, being successful and winning is actually extremely important to him. So he put in the work to get where he did. I think, in short, like Bjergsen showing up, like we would have continued to win probably for another four splits. Yeah. It's just Bjergsen was so incredibly talented that he just shifted the whole league.
Yeah. I mean, by the way, along those lines, another thing I wanted to ask was, obviously, after he played mid lane, he came back for that jungle run initially where there was the problems at the time, and then you did later the support swap as well. I always thought the part people missed about that is, like, they understand, because there's even a few scrims where people have heard the comms, they understand Hai had a great mind for the game, could shot call in the game, but I don't think they get as well. I feel like in the modern day, the example they might understand is when Perkz left G2, they still had all amazing players, but I've heard inside the team, they didn't realise sort of what he brought as a leader and as a captain, and even someone where maybe in a scrim he's the guy who's sort of like, be more serious, or you flame someone a little bit, and if you don't have that dynamic, sometimes teams, it's just a collection of players. Was there some of that as well as to why you wanted to keep bringing him back, or he was coming in to help patch up the team sometimes?
Yeah, there's a lot of intangibles on teams that's not just like grind a bunch of scrims and put in a bunch of solo queue or being a mechanical monster. You have to be it's a team game. You need to be able to get the best out of your teammates. Your teammates need to trust that you're going to be there when they need you to be, and and you also as a leader need these other four guys to absolutely follow you. When Hai went in, he was really loud about it. Like and engaged on a fight, he was really loud about it, and he had four players that absolutely would just follow him, and that ability to get the trust from the guys, even if it was a bad play, but they all went on it, it changed the odds in their favor to sometimes win fights they shouldn't have. And his ability to, command respect and trust from his teammates it's hard to quantify, but it's incredibly valuable for teams. And with that team, like at the time, when we had benched Hai, we brought in Jensen. Without that glue to hold all these guys together, although they mechanically were a better team than with Hai, they didn't operate and function as a team, and in a team game they just lost. And when Hai came back, he was able to, even though he wasn't an expert at the jungle, he was able to direct the team to objectives and get them to work together. And that's why we were able to like dig ourselves out of, like, literally, I think we were like last place by week 5 in that split. And we didn't even qualify for playoffs, but we were able to, through the gauntlet, fight our way all the way through it.
The original team, the original 5 that had the 4 splits together and a couple of worlds, I always thought that must have been, like, as an owner, there's a lot of owners that, like, maybe they go to the match but they don't know the games. You've always been super hands-on with both League and CSGO, and you've watched so many matches. So it must have been one of the most fun teams as an owner to be backstage watching for, because that was a team, the original 5, felt like they could win from any situation, or they had that special quality to them, right, as a team.
Yeah, I remember that even when we were behind, I never stressed. Like, and we were behind often in early games, but it didn't matter. By mid game, their team fighting was so much better than other teams that they could pull themselves back from being behind from the landing phase, and that was a pretty unique time. It was definitely a different era of League of Legends where I think it was easier to pull that off because the teamwork for teams just wasn't as good as it is now, and it really it was a very special team. It was a very personable team. It was before there was a lot of other stress from VCs and large expensive leagues to get involved. It was definitely more of a fun era, and I I definitely look back fondly on those days because it was a completely different world than it is now.
When you actually did replace Hyde, you brought in Incarnation later to become Jensen, right? People might know a little bit of like, oh, I heard he was like banned on solo queue in Europe, but like it's so much more than that. Like from what I heard, when they did that ban, that was one of those ones in the early days where it was like an indefinite ban, and essentially that just at the time meant you just banned for life, like figure it kid, like there's no esports for you. Yeah, basically, like now people will think it's like, oh, but for how long? And I heard basically what you did with that is you just sort of tested the premise, which is a clever one, which is that Riot believed in this nonsense that they do for all the players in solo queue, obviously of like, we're going to rehabilitate you, and if you're good and then you don't misbehave, then you earn the ability to speak in the game back again. Your suspensions go away. I've heard basically it was almost like you just applied that logic to the pro angle of sort of like, right, what does he have to do to get unbanned then? Right, okay, well, he's done these things now. He spent this long without being toxic in solo queues. How did he get unbanned, and how did he get him into LCS? Because there's a lot of people in Europe told me like essentially he's going to be like one of those people you hear about who goes to like prison and never plays in the NBA, like they're just a what if story and there'll be like a ghost story or a campfire. How did you get him into LCS? Because it's a big deal that he goes from banned to starting on one of the bigger teams in NA.
Yeah, it was an interesting story. Like I was definitely following it. There was a lot of things at play, right? Like to start with, just I saw this player. He was obviously incredibly talented, and I saw the ban, and I'd been talking with several like contacts I had at Riot about the ban system, and is there no hope for a guy who's messed up? Like, how does he dig himself out? What exactly is required? What would the timeline be like? And I couldn't get any like definite answers, but it did feel like that they didn't believe in forever lockout. Like if someone was behaving had improved, like the way they interact with the community could bring their way back. And I had a situation where, Hai was having wrist issues. He wasn't able to play the way that he had before, as far as like the amount of solo queue or the amount of time he could play the game. And that can be really hard on your teammates, because if one player sees someone who's not putting in quite as much work as the other guys, they just start getting frustrated. So I'm thinking, okay, I have this situation where I don't know how much longer Hai is going to be able to play. And I really like having a team that wins. And I see this incredible talent over in Europe that he's banned, but for how long? And I know a bunch of other teams are going to be interested in this guy. So what do I do? And so what I did is I put together a contract with Jensen. I called him up and I said, hey, look, I'm not sure what's going on with Hai's wrist. He may not be able to play like for a long time. So why don't I sign you to a contract while pay you money, and what your goal is while you're not on the LCS team is just be like rank 1 in Europe. Okay. And if you get two accounts to rank 1, you get paid more. And I basically kind of scaled up like your pay based on how you're doing in solo queue, which is essentially all he could do at the time. And the deal was that if Hai retires, if I don't promote you to LCS, you can go to any team you want. Like it was just free money while I was working with the league to try to get you unbanned, and while you're looking to be rank 1. And so he agreed to that. I'm like, okay, cool. So I've got this option. Should Hai ever retire and this guy is unbanned, I can bring him in. And now I just need to work on, Riot, what can you do? What does it take to unban this guy? What's the behavior you're looking for? What are the things that like would show indications of it's time for him to be unbanned? And so I was working with, Riot LCS on those conversations, and they were interested in seeing players like be reformed. And so it's a good story if a guy actually is being a better part of the community. At the same time, I was able to make sure I could secure that player should all my efforts to try to get him unbanned were successful. And Hai actually retires. So it all kind of came together where our split ended. Hai couldn't put in the time that I was needing him to be mid laner, and Jensen got unbanned, and so we brought him out for tryouts. And like, even though necessarily he was trying against Pobelter and other really good mid laners, and some of the players actually wanted Pobelter, but I'm like, this kid is too talented. I have to try this, and that's how it happened.
I always say, just because it's good as a narrative from painting the story, I always say to me, it looked like a great move because it was like you just saw Bjergsen come in and you were like, I should get a Bjergsen. And you went and you got a really skilled Danish midlaner that happened to be, like you say, in this perfect like prison where he couldn't play. You freed him sort of with like the probation system, as it were, got him into your team. Now, even though I say it like that, yeah, in the movie, it'd be obvious that you'd have this guy for years and years. And obviously, he did actually become the main rival of Bjergsen. And in Midland, they are sort of like the anime protagonists of the LCS for like 10 years. But no one can really know how long these things last. You know, maybe you have a good year or two with someone. I've heard, and I remember, because actually, if people don't know, when I came and did those interviews for you guys, was at the beginning of this split. It was like the first week, and I remember coming along, and you lost both the games and be like, bloody hell. So how it's beginning. You're supposed to like 2-0, and it's supposed to look awesome. So I always wondered, did you ever wonder, because in that first split, you had to do the bring High back in, and there was some issues with Meteor stuff. Did you ever wonder at any point in the Jensen experiment, like, was it going to be a long-term thing? Were there any teething problems? Because in the end, he became like probably the next most iconic player. In fact, for modern fans, he probably is the icon of Cloud9.
I mean, yeah, that was a rough start. That was a really rough start. And I felt like, I don't think I was ever even thinking about like ejecting or trying to do something else in those early times, because I felt like the problems that we were having weren't because Jensen wasn't good. It was just that our team was just going through like incredible growing pains with, you know, having like a guy like a team captain like High, you know, step down and then come back as jungle. These are, no matter what team you're on, you have those changes. It's going to be super painful. And I wasn't, you know, I wasn't giving up on Jensen at all. I don't think it even crossed my mind at that time. I just felt like this guy's incredibly talented. We need to figure out how to get this team functioning around him.
The other thing is this part almost is like a movie bit. That chapter where it's like the prodigal son and he came back last year and then you win the LCS together, even though you'd had like a split off. And obviously if people don't know, despite all the amazing like worlds and other, the one thing you guys never managed to do together was win LCS. Like there's almost something poetic about that, right?
Dude, it actually was so wonderful, like that for that to happen, especially like we just had like our Korea 9 explosion. Like we were not in a good state. And so we were kind of we're kind of bringing back our old team together. And then Jensen, like it is available. Like, you know, he's just been kicking back for a whole split. And I didn't know how that was going to go. It was awesome bringing Jensen back because we had such a good history and so much good trust there. And it was also really cool to see, you know, when he left Cloud9, you know, it was a while ago, and the Jensen that came back after Liquid was so much more mature, so much like he was like a boy left and a man in return. I was like, wow, it was so great to work with him. And then to have that run in playoffs where we came together and played really well as a team and were able to finally lift that trophy together after all this time, it was pretty special for me. It was pretty special for Jensen as well. And it almost seems unreal when you think about it, that because things don't generally, you know, there's the movie plot and then what real life happens, and it actually happened, which is so damn cool.
When you had those years where he initially left the team and went to Team Liquid, and then they just kept winning the championship, and then it'd be a few years since Cloud9 had a win at that point. So did you ever feel any sour grapes or feel a bit bitter that he went and he won the championship with someone else? I
was actually happy for him. It sucked because he beat me.
Sure, yes.
So that was brutal. But Jensen and I have a really good relationship. Like we're friends, and I was happy to see him do well. So I didn't have sour grapes. Steve built an incredible team at a time where the LCS I think was fairly weak. He spent big, and he bought the best players, and he put together an incredible team. So it was hard to beat those guys. Yeah, when I think back about it, I don't think I have any sour grapes. It's really easy for me to say that because we've had a lot of wins now. I'm trying to remember what was that feeling like at that time. But I don't think I ever felt like, oh, Jensen, he screwed us. Because like when he left, like the reasons he left and it made sense to me. And he had put in so much time with us, and he'd gotten us to semifinals. So it was all good. It was like, our relationship was really good at that point in time, and he put in the work, and he would have stayed if I asked him to. He would have stayed like if I had made some adjustments to how we run the team. But he told me, he's like, you shouldn't change how you run Cloud9. It works well for you. But I don't want the stress of constantly having someone behind me ready to replace me. I want to just be on a superstar team. And, I got that. That made sense to me. So there was no sour grapes at all. I think, of course, I wanted to win with him. I wanted to be that guy that won with him, but it wasn't like, oh man, screw you. It was definitely like, wow, that's awesome. Wish it could have been me.
That was one thing I wanted to ask about, because if people don't know, one of the reasons why Jensen, obviously in this case, chose to go to Team Liquid was this thing where you'd already brought up like Blabber, and you had Golden Glue in mid lane, and already, if people don't know, the year before you'd had like the Impact Ray thing, where it's like we can sub one in, can bring one out, and it was more like having versatility in the team and also developing talent, etc. But if you are a player who's a big superstar player, like understandably, if they're in the NFL, they want the guaranteed money, they want to start every game, they want the no trade clause. We understand why the stars want this, but I always thought, was that like a conscious decision? Was that mainly because Reaper run that idea? Was it a decision that you were going to take this approach going forward, that like essentially, it's not that you don't want the players, but everyone can be replaced if it's the right time, or if it makes business sense, or it's where they're at in their career? Was there a change? Because I always felt before that, it's one thing I was a bit critical about, when you had the original core and you were gradually letting them go one by one, I always wondered, were you a bit too loyal to some of those? Like, it seemed like you were just, I don't know if your friendship made you believe they could play a bit longer, but to me, I always thought some of the other orgs, they were the ones more willing to just make the hard cuts. And I would say in the latter half of Cloud9, you've been the best at that. You actually seem like the best at sort of knowing when to sell early, when to like buy a guy and use him for 1 year and then let him go afterwards. Was there a period where it changed?
Yeah, it did go from like, I was slower to make changes because I really believed in those people, and it was really hard for me like to make changes when these people were they are friends, and so that was super difficult. But I think somewhere along the way I realized that I need to make a commitment to all of my players that I'll be building the best team possible, and so that when and I could look at in the eyes of each player that's on the team, and I tell them like, if you are not putting in the work, I will replace you. And that's hard to hear. But also the other side of that coin is, if you ever see one of your teammates who's no longer motivated, no longer passionate about like winning and doing the best, you can be confident that I will look to replace that person with someone has the hunger and the fire to be the best. And so everyone on the team knows that like, they never need to worry that I'm just carrying someone because of a relationship. The biggest goal is to have the best performing team possible, and that everyone needs to be putting in really hard work to get there as a group. And there's so if you join the team, like you're agreeing that I'm going to put in the time in the solo queue to be the best. I'm going to have a really good attitude in our teamwork. I'm going to be putting in the work and to be passionate. And they understand that if they're no longer able to dedicate themselves to that, they're opting out of being with our team. And that's sort of like the philosophy at I think it was around 2018 where I really just dug into that. And it first manifested as a large scale when our LCS team that summer they came back. We got another second place, then threw onto like the massive like wall of second place like victories that we have, which are terrible. I think there used to be jokes about Cloud 2 because we just kept getting second place everywhere. And I didn't see the fire out of my 5 players like that for us to be a winning team. And we didn't know why in scrims our team wasn't working well, but no one seemed to give a damn. Like we would lose a game in scrims and players would just be like, I don't know what's going on, and just didn't really seem to actually care to figure it out. And me and Reaper were just sitting there going like, how do we get these guys to care? Because at the exact same, like in the same house, the next room over, I would see our academy team just on fire to learn to get better, like just go into the review, just listening to the coach, throwing out ideas on how to improve. And I'm like, me and Reaper, like, we want that care and that passion that we see in this up and coming team onto our main team. And this challenger team or this academy team was beating other LCS teams. And so we're just thinking maybe what we need to do is just bench a few of these LCS players, bring in these really hungry academy players and see if we can bring that fire into the team. It obviously was like a huge debacle, like in the PRs thing when we benched. I think it was Sneaky, Jensen, and Smoothie. But as much as the PR was kind of a nightmare about it, internally it wasn't that bad because it just lit a fire underneath those guys to get better. We saw our players who were like Diamond 4 in like on the solo queue ladder suddenly grinding really hard and being like top 10 players. They're crushing it in scrims all of a sudden. There was suddenly this fire to get better. I want that spot back. And the players who didn't like get benched felt good that they knew that their teammates were suddenly caring again. And yes, we went back to mostly that same roster, but it wasn't 100%. Like Smoothie never came back. It was Zazel at that time. But we ended up with a team going into playoffs that was much more fired up to actually do well. And I felt like, hey, this is something we need to stick with because it had a visible impact on just the team culture of our team. So I don't think we can go back to it. But it was a stressful time. And Jensen, after that, he's like, whoa, I don't want to have someone going for my job nonstop. This is stressing me out pretty bad. So we can either go back to like, I have my job or please trade me.
On the topic of Reaper, this is someone I really want to ask you about because I actually knew, thanks to Monty and people in Korea, when he used to be in the Korean scene. And if people don't know, I even did like an article about this way back in the day. One of the coolest things about Reaper is he really is like a character out of an anime, where in the Korean scene, where they want everything to be super strict and they have all their own systems and ways you have to be, he is that guy who's like the individual genius protagonist character who's sort of like, no, like, let me do it my way. Like, I've got this like own approach to it, etc. So I always thought it was very interesting you brought him into your team and sort of kept him for so long with so many different lineups. Like, who would you say Reaper is, and what was the relationship there? Like, did he have full control, as it were? Did he have the green light to do what he wanted? To what degree did he have to answer to you?
It was very much a partnership. Like, we were a team in how we approached the team. He basically when it came to anything strategical, like strategy about the team, he had complete control there, and he would tell me who he wants in, who he wants out. But outside of that, basically, even when it came to like recruitment and signing players, that was my domain. Setting team culture for like what we are going to be, how we're going to operate and function on a daily basis. That was that was my domain, and so we kind of split the role in half, and he focused on what he had, and he's got a brilliant mind for the game, and he was able to I think one of his skills is to kind of recognize our weaknesses as a team and eliminate them, like through like pick and ban or the way to identify the weaknesses of the other teams, to be able to just really come at our opponents in a way that gives us the best possible chance of actually winning. And he was very good at getting more out of our team and getting deeper runs than we probably ever should by focusing on the weaknesses of our opponents and understanding our own weaknesses as well.
Even though it was a long time till a championship came with him as a coach, I'll just tell people, if they go and look at the track record, yes, he had a lot of good players supplied to him, but man alive, he turned in a lot of double-digit win splits. This guy just must be one of the most consistent coaches ever.
No, he was a fantastic partner to work with. I really enjoyed working with him, I think it was just one of those things that there was no like, oh, we don't like working together. When he left the team, it was just more like, we've had an incredible run together and he wants to try something different, and that totally makes sense.
Yeah, along those lines, by the way, one thing I thought you could address is, I know for fans, because oftentimes they're not even just analysing like as a tactical element of the game, they're doing things like they have their own relationship with the player, or if they're a Cloud9 fan, they want that player to be in Cloud9 for a long time. I know there'll always be a certain level of the fan base who wants like iconic legacy people to stay in the org forever, essentially, like never give up on them. But I actually think the way you're describing it there makes a lot more sense to me. Like, I used to do the same thing when I was a kid in my favourite band, the lead singer and the guitarist break up and you spend the next 20 years like, oh, I wish they'd get back together. But after reading enough interviews, what I learned was a lot of them will even say like, oh no, it was great to be in that band, but that was just like that period of my life and it just doesn't make sense anymore. Also, maybe we both need to explore other things. Maybe he needs to go do this band here or you have to go solo. There is kind of that element to these team elements, right? Even though at one point you might be very close, sometimes you have to wish them well, and maybe the same for them. Maybe they have to go take a different offer.
Yeah, I think it's really important to recognize that like when it's time for a change, just because, you know, the fire that kept you working together in the past is gone. And it's really important to not hang on and just let something naturally die sometimes, because it's not good for either party. Sometimes like a player, you'll recognize they've kind of peaked out at Cloud9 and they're really in a position to command massive salary from other teams. And I was also when you actually get buyouts, it's not really happening anymore. I could maximize my buyout and they could also maximize their salary at the exact same time. And if you're not really feeling it as a team anymore, like don't hold on and pass up that opportunity. Like get that player, like, you know, Impact went from making like $180,000 a year to like seven figures with Team Liquid. And I specifically remember it was, you know, being, I think it was 2017 that year, when after Worlds, like he told me like, hey, I got a crazy offer from Liquid, and he's like, but I'm willing to stay at Cloud9 for what I'm making, 180K, because I think next year I'll be I'll be an NA player and maybe I could get more money. And I said, well, how much Steve offer you? And he's like, $1 million a year. I'm like, holy shit, like that's crazy, dude. Like, no, you need to take that money and let me teach you about guaranteed contracts.
There you go.
And he bought me a steak dinner, and I was happy for him. It's just like one of those opportunities. Like he really enjoyed playing with us, but it's just one of those opportunities where you see like this is such a good opportunity for him. He needs to take it and run with it, and that's okay. And I think similar was to Sven Skaren. Like he was the MVP. And we had an incredible run. The couple of years he had been with me, he was in a prime position to get maximum salary out of anybody that he went to go to play for. And he was a prime position for me to get a maximum buyout as well. And it was actually very hard on me. I didn't really want to give him up at that point. But when he told me, like, he gave me like the infamous list, I'm like, okay, well, incredible players I could never hire. It was okay. This guy really doesn't believe in what we're doing anymore. Let's get him onto a team that he wants to be on at a salary he wants to get, and let me maximize my buyout. And instead of fighting us, like, let's just try to lean into it and see what could be the best for everybody involved.
A player from the old school I did want to ask about is obviously Meteos, another massive personality in the early days. I will say I've known a lot of his teammates in his teams and the different teams he's been on. And what I'll say is this: in some ways, I don't know if he'll fuck with this reference or not, but to me, he almost sounds a little bit like a Dennis Rodman character. And I say that because if people know, Dennis Rodman was like unique at what he was really good at. And if you could get him to work within those parameters, you could have the best team. He could be the best. But he also was someone where you wouldn't put him on just any random team. You wouldn't put him with any random set of players. You'd need to sort of like create a space in which he can be Dennis Rodman, but at the same time be part of the team. And I've always got the sense with Meteos that like he is someone who has a different vision perhaps on like how much he should grind or what his relationship with other teammates is. And I won't say, I'm not trying to paint him as like a toxic teammate. I would just say someone that it's just a little bit trickier maybe. You maybe need to have the right circumstances. What would you say the back and forth with Meteos was like? Because people will know he was in the team and he was out of the team, then he came back again. And overall, he did play for the team for a number of years, was a great player, but I would just say he was in other orgs where similar things happened. He came in and out of the lineup, was benched sometimes. So who was Meteos when he was in Cloud9?
Meteos, like, he joined Cloud9 in our infancy, and it was more fun than work at that time. So he became I became very close with him as a friend, on more than just a player for me. And I would say he definitely is a very unique player in his play style, and it's really important that he has a good like friendly relationship with his players to be for him to get for you to get the most out of him. He is probably one of the smartest players I've ever worked with. He's got an incredible vision of the game and how it should work. And I think that when you're someone like that, I think one of the difficulties is like if you're working with players that don't have that vision, it can be really frustrating to work with them because he's playing like chess when everyone else is playing checkers. He's thinking way more about the game, and then having to try to explain that to everyone around you all the time, trying to be if he has to be in a situation where he has to be the coach and the teacher at the same time as being a player, it's a really hard position to be in. So he needs to be around players that can buy into that or are smart enough to be on the same level. Otherwise, I think it can be really frustrating. I think throwing like him around like 4 rookies is probably a really difficult situation unless they completely just listen to him. But he definitely, you could see that like when I gave him he basically was with me. We did the roster change to bring on Jensen, and I think he felt like felt a bit personally attacked by some of his teammates about that happening because people thought that he seems frustrated with Hai a lot. He must be the reason why Hai isn't on the team anymore. And I could just tell you, like, for the record, straight up, he actually was against the change. But it was really unfortunate that he felt like, and he may have gotten some of that pressure, and that hurt his relationship with the other players. And the team was very unhappy, like functionally, when that first change happened. And when he saw that he couldn't lead that team without Hai, it was his suggestion that Jack, can you bring back Hai, have him run jungle so we can.
Oh, that's cool. He actually suggested that.
Yeah,
right.
It was him. And he said, bring him back because we're not working. We're not functioning. We're not communicating. And I'm feeling really bad about that. And I think that Hai could come in and actually do a better job than me. Not because he's a better jungler than me, but because I think the team will work as a team. And literally, like Hai's very first scrim, like it was a different team. Like just all of a sudden it was functioning based on the communication, and he's like, I'm out, dude, I'm going to stream. And that was brutal. But it was also like incredibly, like, I think, caring for his teammates and for the team to realize that, he needed to step down. So he started streaming a lot, and he had actually his stream was getting numbers at that time. It was like, he was doing really well. And Phoenix 1 was just at the same time suffering really bad, and they needed a jungler, and I can't remember why. Maybe a jungler just like left. I can't remember the actual history, but something happened, and Rob Moore, the owner of Phoenix 1, hit me up. He's like, hey, could Medios play for me? And I'm like, I'll ask him. And Medios like, sure, I'm down. And his first game back was against us, against Cloud9.
Right.
And he destroyed us. And I was so pissed. I was like, God damn it, dude. Like, are you serious? I trade you in the first game, you come out and just smash us. It actually killed me because the guy is an incredible player. And like in the right circumstances, he can really move things for teams. And I think, I don't think really any team was able to put together 4 other guys and a coach that got the best out of him. And that's disappointing, but I think that's just the reality. And I think it's possible that unfortunately I don't know traditional sports as well as I should, but this Rodman guy sounds like it could be something similar where like he needed the correct teammates and the correct like culture to get the best out of him. I think that's appropriate for Will.
One player that it's funny because this is one where absolutely all the people who were the superstars of Cloud9 was salty as fuck when finally Sneaky played his last game in Cloud9. And it was even maybe implied, I'm not sure if it's towards you guys, but it was even implied he thought maybe it was like, wasn't the right way it was handled at the end. One thing I would say about this is the player I personally, look, if I'm Thorin on a talk show, I probably spent the last 4 years of his career flaming Sneaky and saying like, you should replace him with like a superstar of Korean or get like the best European ADC, bring in my boy Forgiven or something. Some of the rumors I heard over the years, right? You stuck with this player a long time. He was in the team for like 7 straight years or something, 8 or something. What would you say about the Sneaky angle? Because like essentially, wasn't this another player where there was years where a lot of the community was sort of like, should he still be there, or is he washed, or is he good or not? And I know he always thought he was good the whole way. He's another one of those guys that has that mindset where the fans just don't see what he's doing, or there's nuance to how he was laying in or something. What would you say the Sneaky storyline is?
God, because it's so long, there's chapters, right?
Okay.
And I think with Sneaky, he is an incredibly good teammate in that he never rages on teammates. He no matter how bad things get bad in a game, he's able to raise like the mood of the team to get people in the if it's a best of 5, he can make, even after a crushing loss, he can start making the other guys laugh and start thinking about the next game. And inside the game, he's always looking for angles. Like I think Doublelift once said it, that like basically like with low resources, Sneaky is always dangerous, like when it comes to mid game. And that's something like a superpower of his. He's able to do so much with so little. Between him having that in-game personality and out-of-game personality, plus his ability to do more with less, he's been extremely valuable for us, or was extremely valuable for us over the time. But I think like the reason why Sneaky left the team is a lot in line with what I was saying earlier, where every member on the team needs to look to the guy next to them and feeling like they're putting in as much time as them. And at the end of our 2019 run, which was probably our worst offseason that we've ever had, where I specifically remember like after we got eliminated at Worlds in Paris, I think it was in Paris, no, it was in Germany, and I sit down with Sven Skaren because I always have like a post Worlds interview with each player, and I asked Dennis, Sven Skaren, I'm like, so what changes do we need to make for this team to make it better? And he's like, well, fire everybody. I want the coach gone. I want every player gone. And you're going to have a really tough offseason, Jack. And I'm like, oh my God. I remember my stomach just like dropped. He's like, I'm sorry, it's going to be rough. I'm like, oh my God, what's going on? So I was just literally interviewing with every player, trying to figure out who still wants to be here, who still believes in what we're doing. How do we go from here? And the first player that told me like, I don't want to go anywhere was Blabber. He's like, but I don't want to share the stage with Dennis anymore. No more Sven Skaren, no more swapping. But I'm good enough, Jack, to be your guy. And if you commit to me, then I'll commit to rebuild with you. And Niski was like, I just want a job, man. Like I don't have any problems with anybody, but I want to make sure that I have a job. And then I talked with Licorice, and Licorice was like, if we make some pretty big changes in the team, which was like, I want to replace the coach. I want to replace our bot lane. I don't know what the hell's going down there. At that point, I finally had a core. I had 3 guys that still wanted to play, which was Licorice, Blabber, and Niski. And from there, we started optimizing on like, what's the team you want to build? What's the culture you want to have? What are the things that you need? And with our bot lane, there was this huge question mark because things weren't working well with Zeyzal and Sneaky. They're getting punished like pretty bad in most of our scrims. And there also was concerns about like lack of focus on League because they were both playing a lot of other games, Path of Exile and some other games. And they wanted players that were grinders. They wanted players that were putting in as much solo queue as possible. So we started like just, thinking about like, would you rather have this teammate who grinds really hard, which would be like, Jesper, like Sven Skaren, as Sven, like you look at him, the guy's like the hardest grinder in the West, as far as I can tell. And we started building a team that was putting in tremendous work. And we saw Vulcan was possibly available for a buyout that kind of fit in line with what we're looking to build. And what it came down to is like when we started constructing this roster, they didn't believe in our bot lane at all, and they wanted to change there. They weren't sure if it was it a Sneaky problem, was it a Zeyzal problem, but they knew they didn't want to play again with that as a question mark anymore. And I think like I'm sure I could have done like the breaking that news better, and I think that when I wasn't able to specifically identify problems for Sneaky on why we were making this change, that was really, really painful for him. Especially when it was like, hey, it's not just a Jack decision. This is what your teammates are constructing to me to do. I think it was just super painful. I honestly don't know how I could have done it
Sure.
better. It's really hard news to get when you've been with a team for a super long time and he's been really dedicated. But at the same time, like my my promise, like to all of my players, is that when I recognize that there's a problem, we're not the best team we can be, that I'm going to fix it, and I'm going to come through on that. And so that was my obligation to these players, and that was the decision we made, and it sucked. It was definitely the hardest benching I ever had to do. And I think like since then, like me and Sneaky's relationship is good now. Like he's helped us out. He comes to our booth basically at every LCS finals now. He spends time with us, makes content with us, and he recognizes now that there's been some time away that it was like not we hate you, Sneaky. It was like, this is what the team was really wanting, and it definitely wasn't a Jack saying you're out of here. It was a whole group decision on what we made, and I think it helped that we also just absolutely destroyed that spring to like just show that what we were doing actually had some impact. And I think there was a bit of justice in there, that it was also the first Worlds we never qualified for when there was no Sneaky. So there was something about that no Sneaky or no Worlds thing that was true.
One thing I wanted to ask is, obviously you guys were the main rivals of TSM for a period in time. You have your own connection with TSM, and obviously you've known Reginald a long, long time as a friend of yours. But one thing I wanted to ask was, again, in narratives, it's a perfect narrative if it want to contrast. Like Reggie's seen as sort of like the hard-ass owner that bursts in the room and tells people, like, you're not fucking scrimming right, you're 0-2, like, get your shit together or I'm going to replace you. Whereas Jack was seen as more of like sort of like fucking nurturing owner who was more like, we'll figure it out together, we'll fit the systems to what we're going to do here. Is it too much of an easy narrative to look at Svenskeren and Sven, who were both players who were actually considered semi-washed at the end of their time with TSM? TSM didn't want them, and in fact a lot of people wondered, like, had they sort of fucked their careers up with the time in TSM? Is there a satisfaction? Is it just a narrative to say that they reinvented themselves in Cloud9 and that Cloud9's culture had something to do with that?
I think there is something there. I think that the way we work with players, I've repeatedly heard that we're able to get more out of players than really any other team, and I think that has something to do with the culture that we have, the expectations that we set. We do believe that, like, the culture of how you work together actually has a large impact on how you work together as a team, and that the sum, can be much greater than the parts. And I think that's just slightly different, where I think TSM for years has really kind of stood up on their superstar players, and we have not done that way. We haven't done it that way. And so like, I think it's a bit unfair. Like I don't think that Svenskeren left because he was washed or anything like that. I think it was just that, hey, they had this opportunity to bring in Mithy and Sven, and you only have 2 import slots, and you don't take one without the other. You have to take both. And they were considered widely as the best bot lane in the Western world. And if they had the opportunity to keep like Svenskeren, they would have, but they couldn't. And I think they just made I think the big mistake they made was they chose an inappropriate jungle to replace him. And I think the 2 positions that probably they're unsung, or they don't get enough praise as they should, is like support and jungle have such a massive impact on the team's ability to function as a whole. And when you put a guy in jungle he's just not qualified for the job, it just hamstrings that team. And I think it's funny, the whole talent suppression machine, that kind of stuff. Like, sure. I think it's a meme. Like, it makes me laugh, and it tells like a good like narrative for Cloud9. But I think we did make like Jesper and Dennis, like Sven and Svenskeren, look much better than they did on TSM, and we are able to capture and shine, make those talents shine better than they could on TSM. But there was some like other circumstances there. It wasn't like they just kicked Dennis out because they didn't thought he was garbage.
I'm going to skip forwards a little bit because since we're just talking about the TSM angle, this has to be asked as a question. So even though I notice you must have fucking good media control, mate, because the right stories never seem to leak out until it's sort of like safe for them to. So no, I never saw this in any of the rumours, mate, which is when Team Liquid signed Bjergsen. So they got Bjergsen after all these years and they paid him a massive fucking contract. They built that super team around him. A lot of people might not know. I mean, now I might just rudely say you might have dodged a bullet on that one. I heard the other main bidding partner was Cloud9 and you were going pretty hard. You wanted to have Bjergsen in Cloud9 at some point in time?
Yeah, my players were like determined for me to get him. And I had really good interviews with him. But he really wanted a very specific roster. And I wasn't able to give him let me think about this. It's the best way to say this. So the rosters the players that he wanted to play alongside with, I wasn't convinced were really interested in what we were building. And after, so basically he was like, yeah, I'm interested. Sounds good. But can you change this AD carry? Can you change this support? And I would go talk to these guys. And I felt like, I was chasing them so hard to join, but they also didn't really seem committed about this project at all. And at some point I'm like, wait, why am I chasing this so hard when I don't think they actually want to be here? I don't think like Hans Sama really wants to come to North America. I don't think some of these supports I'm talking to are super interested in this idea. This seems too hard. And at some point I'm like, I went back to my team and I'm like, guys, like, these guys don't want to come. They don't actually want to be here. Why don't you talk to them? And they interview these players. And they're like, yeah, fuck these guys. They don't even want to come. Like, why are we chasing these guys? They're not bought in on what we're doing. And so, yes, there was a time we really wanted to bring on Bjergsen. And I think that Bjergsen, we would have gotten, I think we could have done better with Bjergsen than, but because I don't think he's a bad player necessarily. He just needs a certain type of team. But I need players to want to be here. I need players to like when they commit, it's not kind of like half-assed. They need to convince me that the program that we're building and the culture that we have is something they want. Not just like, oh, I'll put up with it, but they have to want, because if they don't want it, they're gonna hate it. They're gonna hate that we push our players so hard. So and I didn't feel that dedication from those guys, so I opted out. Like I basically remember just going, this isn't going to work, and I'm out. It wasn't that they didn't accept my bid. I dropped out. And then all of a sudden, like, I kind of feel this bad for Steve because, like, the price had been getting pushed up. And then I'm like, yo, dude, I'm out. But it's like, once you put that price up there, it's not real easy to take it down, And I was just like, all right, man, I'm out, dude. And that didn't work out. And I think the reality is that he didn't have five guys actually were believing in the vision that Steve was putting together.
From hearing over the years how you've made some of the decisions and who you wanted and who you didn't get and who you did get, it sounds like part of the things that people have conflated with the idea of the systems is more what you're talking about. It's the idea that you heavily vet the person before they join the team. You don't just see that they're amazing in Korea or Europe and go, get them on my team. It's not like a mercenary scenario where you just sign them for the most part. Because the reason why I bring this up, dude, is I actually feel like that's where so many other NA teams have lost it. Like, they'll do the interviews and they'll all ape the same thing. They'll say, like, and are you part of the, the culture that we're building? But they don't know what they even mean by that. Whereas the thing I've noticed is you've almost never done that thing where you sign the massive European player. And it's like you were saying about a certain player earlier. They're not coming because they actually want to play in NA. They might not even respect the concept of LCS. They're just looking at the check going, in my team, I was working for like 200K. I've been waiting a long time to get this paid in. This is like, I sort of deserve this. Like, I'm gonna do. And then maybe they convince themselves, maybe it goes great. But I get the vibe that once they get there, I've tried to tell some of my friends that they didn't leave and stayed as top players in Europe. I said, the problem you're going to have is when you sign the contract, it's going to look amazing, all those zeros. But when things are really bad in the middle of like split one, you can't really pull up your bank account and go, no, everything's fine. Like, that's not human nature, is it? No. So like, it sounds like this is a key part for you, that you really have to know that like they're not just coming because you've got a lot of money you can give them.
Yeah, there is definitely an interview process, and there's a gut check on what I'm hearing. Do they actually believe in it? And sometimes people like they'll convince me in the interviews that this is exactly where I want to be, and then day one of practice shows up and they're not showing up on time and they're not really into it, and immediately like the players are like, who is this guy? Like, he's not what we were promised. Who is this? And it ends quickly. And like I will say that like I have found much better success, or much more success, in developing our talent versus buying talent. It's I've bought some really good players, and it's like 50-50 when you buy a player. And so the development can be expensive, but I think it is like it is the way to go where possible. But if you're going to buy that player, you really need to vet it hard, because to make sure everybody understands the expectations of how this is going to function and has bought into it. Because I've tried a few people that they look too good. I must hire this guy, and they don't seem a little fishy like in the interview, and it doesn't go well.
Along the lines of when you gave the classic Meteos cliche, he said he was playing chess but not checkers. I feel like you've been doing that as a GM, though, because when we're talking about this idea where you've sort of done the Bill Belichick, where you sell the person a year early while they still look good, and then the idea is if they go to shit and they get washed, it's on someone else's team, but they've bought them from you. Look, as much as I don't want to make it sound like you're selling second-hand cars here, and they're all a Dodd and a Lemon, you've done a pretty good fucking job of selling people where, like I say, if people look, maybe even the first split they join, they're still really good, but there's 2 years later, there's very few players that your fans would be like, I wish we still had him. Like, if I even look now at the league, there's 5-6 your players out there, and the rest of the league in past years, you probably had like 10-15 players that have been in Cloud9, have been in other LCS teams and had other careers. Sometimes a little bit of success, often not that much. Do you get a sense? Is there a process? Do you have an intuitive feel to when they sell them? It sounds like you're also just really good at essentially convincing people, yeah, this is the player for you, or in getting them a good deal. Quite frankly, you've made a lot of people good salaries in other teams.
I think all of that plays into it somewhat. I think that there is like a passion check for me. Like, I like to sign like 3-year contracts with my players, mainly because, and often players will be like, I don't want to sign a 3-year contract. What if I'm a lot more valuable like next year than I am now? Which is like a valid concern. But what I commit to each one of those guys is every single year, I'm going to extend with you. I'm going to at least make an offer to extend with you. And at that point in time, every single year, you can set the salary for what you think is right for you. And I think one of the parts of like, I think that catches my eye is that when it comes to an extension and I set the price or ask them what it is they want to extend with, and if they just say no, like they're looking like I just want to run the clock out on my contract. For me, that's an indication that, hey, maybe this guy doesn't really want to be here anymore. And I always say, like, I tell him, like, hey, if you want to be traded, just tell me, like, you want to be traded, you want to try something else. And it's a friendly conversation. And I will reach out to every single GM and every single owner to get you on whatever team you want. You can make a list of the teams you do not want to go to, and I won't go talk to them. But I think that process of like every year, like kind of resetting the relationship and finding out like, I really believe in this program. I really believe if you pay me this, like I will sign up for a longer period of time, or I don't want to resign with you, man. I don't like my teammates. Maybe actually I want to be traded. Like going through that process every single year, I think it's really important that you just don't like do a 3-year contract and you forget it, because sure, you've locked up that talent for 3 years, but if they're not happy and they're already thinking about going somewhere else, you're not going to get the best out of them. And it's better for everybody involved to get them on a team where they want to be. So I think having that philosophy on how I deal with like making sure that I look to extend it every single year often catches players that maybe are looking to cash out and want to do something else. Now, as far as like the quality of that player, like, I don't think I'm selling lemons as they go out the door. I think like what's happened is that the things that made that player successful with me, they don't have it when they end up on another team. And I've heard this many times like they move to another team and they don't have the same quality partners. Don't have the same quality managers. They don't have the same quality coaching. They don't have the same quality like just infrastructure, because we make their lives easy with like you join Cloud9, you move into one of our houses, and everything is taken care of you, like for you. Like you have someone coming to clean your room every single day. You have someone doing your laundry for you every single day. You have all the food like taken care of. The managers are really responsive and helpful. Like we have a fun kind of community. And then you leave Cloud9 into like the last day of your day at Cloud9, and it's like there's no manager coming to pick you up. There's no one helping you move you in. Sometimes players are moved into like an apartment situation. It's their first apartment they've ever had. And oh God, okay, I've got the apartment, but I don't even have a bed. I don't even have a couch. Like all of a sudden they're spending all this time and effort trying to get their lives sorted out and aren't focused on being the best player they can be. So sometimes it's just like the infrastructure of the team is a bit of a shock for them and the culture is not there. And that culture was what they relied on to do really well. And so some of these players, like, some that actually come back to Cloud9 or when they've left, they've told me like, oh man, I miss my managers. Oh man, right. I miss the things that we had there and I miss the culture. I think like, I know it's infamous like that I make everyone work out every day. Like on every scrim day, we have a strength trainer that comes out and we work out for a full hour. The managers and the coaches and often myself, we're all doing this together. And, those things are hard, but I think like at the end of the year, like I'll have players like specifically it just comes to mind is Sven. I said like, what was like the, one of the best things you liked about like this last year? And he was like, what was the workout? I'm like, wait, you could play by the workout every day. He's like, yeah, but like we all do it together and it's good teamwork. And if you didn't make me do it, there's no way in hell I would do it, but yes. I know it makes me feel good. So having that culture and that infrastructure, I think helps a lot of these players do better than they would otherwise.
Because you guys won the first two splits, but then as you said, you had all those years where it's like every year you'd make a finals, come second, try again next year. At the end, right, now you've got 6 titles. If people don't know, the most ever is 7, but the 7 is basically the prime of Bjergsen plus the first one that Reggie won. Like in the middle, you had Team Liquid came with the 4 in a row, right? In theory, especially with what's going on TSM, Cloud9 is eventually going to become the team with the most LCS titles. You're going to be the greatest team in the region. Does this match up with the vision of what happened when you started Cloud9? Was there ever a period you wondered, would you win again? Because people feel cursed, when you've become second too many times.
It's crazy to think about how close we were so many times and just couldn't like cross it. And I remember actually talking with somebody thinking like, yeah, we're a championship team. And like, dude, you haven't won for like 4 years, man. And I'm like, oh,
true.
Right. Like, but for me, I was always like almost always there. Yeah. And I always believed in us. And like, and I don't, you need to understand, like, even being second is so incredibly hard consistently. And I think people don't actually understand how valuable that is. And I think like a good example of that is like in Dota, we had a team that literally got second place, something like 13 events.
Loads of times, yeah.
And thankfully in Dota, the prize pools are great. So like those guys made really good money, and League, it's not the same. But my players at the end of that year going into TI were just like, we're gonna change the roster up. And after being second place all year long, going into TI, we made some big roster changes. We got like 8th or something, and really struggled from that point forward ever to like actually build a good team. And so, yeah, we didn't win a lot of championships that year, but I think like the culture that we did have, maybe of those guys on any other team would have gotten 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th over and over again. But because of the way we work together, we were able to elevate ourselves up to constantly going to finals. And we just needed to start making more aggressive roster changes to get us over that hump, to actually get us to start getting first. And I think like us getting to the point being comfortable with making roster changes more than we had historically is what got us to the point where we just started winning championships. We always had like the culture was always there to make us a competitor, but any year another team could pop off and beat us. Now I think we now have the right players in place to actually grab championships.
When I talked about the other orgs that have won all the championships, if you look at it, most of it's they either had Bjergsen or Doublelift, or it was the first split ever and Reggie was there, right? In yours, I have a stat for people, which is you won 6 championships with 5 different mid laners, right? Does this mean if I give you the moment, that must be you, right? It must be the org that's doing it, right? It can't just be the players. It wasn't like you just had one great player. You didn't have a Michael Jordan that just won everything for you.
I think it really points, it's an indicator that the culture that we have is what sets us up for success. We're not dependent on any one player. And I think for me, that's good. For me, that's what I want. I want us to be a place that where that we create success, that we know how to build it, and that it's repeatable. And I think for me, that's more valuable. And there's always going to be years where there's some player that's absolutely just popping off and changing the changing the scene and pushing people to in a way that hasn't been pushed before and winning championships. But that's not like repeatable. You can't always be picking up like the superstar or suddenly this pop-off player that came out of nowhere. But if you build up a system where you're consistently a contender, to me, that's super valuable.
People might know, it's going to be one of my last questions on the league part. When you did the perks signing, we even did a video on this channel where you sort of broke down some of the reason why and why like it was like a once in a lifetime chance to get a player like that. I mean, spoiler, it turned out you only wanted to play in NA for 1 year anyway, so you really did get the one chance at it, right? I know when you make a move like that, you even said it's like you got the piggy bank and cracked it. It's time to sort of splurge and actually buy the big player and just go all in. And you did do it. Obviously, people know it was an enormous amount of money initially, right? There was times in that year where, like, I mean, even he'll admit, like, the players thought they might lose that season to TSM and not even make Worlds, and maybe it was going to go to shit and terrible. But I just remember messaging you when you had that outrageous escape from probably the craziest group of death of all time at Worlds. Like in that moment when you got out in that way, because one of those games I remember Perks had like an insane LeBlanc game and like one of the tiebreakers or something. That is the reason you sign a player like that, right? Even though it was only a 1 year thing, it never blossomed into a dynasty or anything. It was a cool sort of experiment, right? It had to be nice to for once be the guy who did splurge on the big name player and ride the roller coaster.
Yeah, I mean, what you said there is like really right. Like the VCs put money into Cloud9 to be able to allow us to take advantage of that type of once in a lifetime opportunity, and it really was. And if I didn't do it, like it would have always haunted me of like what could we have done with this, because he's a very special player, and he it was if you look at the year, it was a very successful year. We won spring, we went to MSI, we qualified for Worlds, we got out of groups. That, I mean, who in this day and age, I don't know if NA is getting out of groups again. Let's be real. It's pretty hard. And so I'm really glad I did it. I'm really glad Vitality paid my buyout back. but
that's the craziest part, that at the end you even got the money. That's ridiculous, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, because of his effort and him doing so well, I had multiple teams looking to pay my buyout back, and I'm really glad that actually happened, because that was crazy. It was $4 million. Like I was like, oh my god, that's a lot of money. But it was. I don't know if I'm ever going to have a moment where I spend that much money on a player again. And it was definitely tested me to like, am I going to take this opportunity? And there is a really big risk. And I'm really glad that, I took the risk, and I'm really glad it paid off, because there are other teams, TSM with Sword Art, did not work out. And I was playing against TSM, the other team that put in a lot of money to compete on the top level here in North America and get to the world stage, and they didn't qualify, and they put in the money, and that had to be crushing for Reginald. I know if the tables had been turned and I hadn't qualified, that would have been a tough pill to swallow.
Where I come from in England, people will often say, oh yeah, you and whose army? Well, I'll tell you what, I've got my own army backing me up. They're called the Skrilluminati. Thank you to Ahmed Hadju, Joseph Adcock, Matt Pugnaccio Racula, Theogony, Animosity, Bot Pounder 420, Jensen Gore, Tobias Bernasconi, Tosh, Toucan, and as always, you know it, a special thanks goes out to my boy Jerky's Minion. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? You want teasers, find out who's in the upcoming interviews? Do you want to ask me a question in my monthly AMA? Maybe you want to be part of those long discussions where we talk about anything and everything in esports. Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is and enlist today in the Skrilluminati via the Patreon link in the box below.